Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer. It is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today I wanted to go through the Day 8 reveals for the Heist League. Today has been a fairly quiet news day with one big piece of news, plus a divination card and a unique item. The unique item should be quite a chase one, and so I'm going to start with that, then the divination card, and then the area skills update. So, Soul Tether is an interesting belt. It was changed considerably recently. Not so much the functionality of the belt was changed. The functionality of the belt is the same as when it was originally introduced. But the key ability that this belt has was given the name Immortal Ambition, and that was tied to the Glorious Vanity Timeless Jewel, which is a Vaal-themed one. So you could either get this mod as a major reason for using a Glorious Vanity as your Timeless Jewel, or you could get it by equipping the Soul Tether belt. Soul Tether doesn't have many other stats, but Immortal Ambition is so strong that it was a compelling item to use anyway. So what we see now is the Replica Soul Tether, and this one is a doozy. Instead of having Immortal Ambition, which is the life leech oriented energy shield and life hybrid mod, you will get Corrupted Soul instead. So this is not a life leech powerhouse the way that Immortal Ambition is, but it gives you a sizable chunk of additional raw hit points. So it gives you resilience against one-shots. So going through the effects of Corrupted Soul, 50% of non-chaos damage taken bypasses Energy Shield. So this means that firstly, you cannot ever use this item on a character that is using Chaos Inoculation, otherwise you will go splat the first time you are hit by anything. But in more useful situations, this is going to mean that if you've got, say, 7,000 life and 1,500 energy shield, and you take a hit for 2,000 damage, normally you would be unable to effectively use a life flask. So normally you'd be at 6,500 life and 0 energy shield. You'd use a life flask and it would pretty much go to waste. It would just heal you 500 health. With Corrupted Soul though, instead you'll take 1,000 life in damage and 1,000 energy shield. At this point, your life flask is providing a little bit more of a boost to you. So that's useful. But what may also be really interesting is that this is the first way to ever get Corrupted Soul and Supreme Decadence together. And this gives you a lot more synergy to having life, to basically getting a lot of recovery from your flasks. So whilst a lot of players in-game prefer to find different solutions than flasks for recovery, and using their flasks for powerful offensive effects instead, or for defensive effects that aren't life recovery, like increased block chance, the combination of Supreme Decadence and Corrupted Soul, which hasn't been possible before, may just be worthwhile looking into. This definitely goes on a build that has a lot of life with a small amount of native energy shield. Anyway, that is the Replica Soul Tether. I think this is going to be a chase item. Additionally, because it's in an item slot that has a terrible implicit mod, this stun and block recovery, I think this is going to be something that, if you can afford it, is going to make some very good 2 implicit corruption bait. Of course, that's going to mean a lot of Replica Soul Tethers getting destroyed, which is going to be half the fun of the 2 implicit corruption chamber. Next up we have a divination card, the Journalist. This one's pretty simple. It gives you a rare helmet. The item level of that helmet will be equal to your character level or 80, whichever is the maximum. That's the standard for rare items that are sourced from a divination card, unless the card says otherwise, and it will be a double veiled rare. So this means that it will be, sometimes it'll have 2 explicit mods, sometimes 3, sometimes 4, and then on top of that 2, 3, or 4 mods, there will be 2 veiled items. Essentially, the way that I see this is that this is a source of unveiling XP. So this is not really going to provide you with a useful item, but it's an itemized form of unveiling XP. Given that it's a helmet slot, I had a look at what can be unveiled in the helmet slot, and the big mods. Firstly, there's the one that a lot of sort of more veteran players get done pretty quickly, but that is genuinely a useful craft, and this is the double resist. So we're not talking about double elemental resist here, we're talking about the hybrid resist like fire resist and chaos resist. So this will help you unveil those, but probably more interestingly, there are 3 different mods that say +1 to the level of a class of gems. So there is area gems, there's projectile gems, and there's melee gems, and some damage projection bonus for that class of gems. So there's a hybrid mod on the helmet that is +1 to the level of socketed projectile gems, and projectiles pierce an additional target. These are reasonably powerful unveils. Now, for people who play in a trade league, you can basically buy all of the veiled helmets you want from other players from pretty early on in the league. So I don't see this being of any real merit in trade leagues at all. For solo self-found players that play a lot, you'll probably get those crafts through your chasing of the rarer unveils. However, where I see this having a bit of a niche is for solo self-found players that don't play a huge amount. Hopefully it's something that is available around the level of, say, yellow maps, and then it'll be something that category of players, like it's a narrow category, but they definitely exist, they'll get something out of this card. Lastly, there's a big piece of news, which is the area control spells. These are kind of cool. So firstly, there is Void Sphere, which was debuted in the trailer, in the original League trailer. This creates an object that generates a pulse within a large radius. The pulse deals physical and chaos damage and pulls non-unique enemies towards its center. The first few pulses generated by Void Sphere have a much greater gravitational pull than subsequent ones. All enemies in its area of influence will also be hindered. The effect of this debuff increases the closer enemies are to the center. Enemies that die within the area affected by the Void Sphere will have their corpses sucked into the void. Void Sphere can be useful for controlling dangerous enemies, cough cough porcupines, grouping a cluster of slower enemies together to inflict a concentrated damage burst, and for triggering on-hit effects over a long period. The skill has a long cooldown, so it can take full advantage of the second wind support to enable you to use it twice in quick succession. Note that only one Void Sphere can be active at a time. So my rating here is that I don't think, by all means try and prove me wrong on this, but I don't think this is going to be useful as a primary skill. Where I think people will use this is in many of the same ways that you might currently use Decoy Totem. You're coming up on a tough fight, and you want to stay alive, so you drop down a Decoy Totem to distract all of the enemies. Well, Void Sphere will serve that purpose. Where Decoy Totem will also distract bosses, and the Void Sphere will not. Void Sphere has its own benefits in being indestructible, at least it appears to be indestructible, and in vacuuming up corpses that leave dangerous on-death effects. I do think that that's its primary niche, and so for me this is going to compete with Decoy Totem on builds that might consider otherwise using Decoy Totem. That said, I'm sure that people will find some other cunning uses for it. The fact that it deals damage is gravy on top of that, but who's going to complain about free gravy? Next up is Frost Shield. Now this one was really interesting, and I really want to see this in practice. So Frost Shield essentially burns away your energy shield to create a physical shield with it. So Frost Shield creates an icy dome on the ground at your location that protects the caster and their allies from enemies. When cast, it rapidly consumes your energy shield at a flat rate for 1 second, and it will grow in power and life based on how much energy shield is drained. The spell provides protection until it runs out of life. Frost Shield will protect you and your allies from a small portion of enemy damage if the enemy is within the shield, or a large portion of their damage if they're outside the shield. All enemies close to or within the shield will also be chilled. Can I just say that that is a very powerful defensive layer. So enemies basically have to pick one, and because they're not intelligently controlled, they won't necessarily even make the right decision. But they've got to choose their poison between either coming close to you and suffering an action speed reduction from being chilled, and potentially other effects from things like bone chill support, or they need to stay outside the shield and have a large penalty to the amount of damage that they can inflict to you. This really conjures up a playstyle of a spellcaster that stands in place, that holds their ground rather than trying to kite, and that just face tanks enemies as much as necessary, using their battlefield control rather than their ability to move quickly around the area that they're in. So that's something that I think is a really interesting design, and I'm looking forward to trying it out. Additionally, while you're inside Frostshield's dome, it will provide additional base critical strike chance. This makes it great for defensive positioning on bosses, letting you take cover within the sphere and unleash hell as long as the shield holds. So yeah, this is another thing that makes this even better. Whilst initially the sorts of builds that jumped to me wouldn't be interested in the additional critical strike chance, so here I was thinking something along the lines of a cold damage over time occultist build. I'm sure that there are ways that you could use this, for instance, with a critical strike freezing pulse build. Just like Void Sphere, it works well with the second wind support. Using the increased area of effect or concentrated effect supports allow you to control whether you want to affect more space or a tighter area. And a smaller shield provides you with better control over how many enemies fit inside it for maximum damage mitigation. And I think it'll just turn out that one of those choices will be the best one. A Sigil of Power is next. Sigil of Power creates a potent circle on the ground that grants additional lightning damage to you and allies within it, while also slightly increasing the cost of your skills. As you spend mana, the skill powers up in stages. Each stage grants more additional lightning damage. Once it's fully powered up, it also causes enemies standing within the circle to deal less damage. So again, this is a stand your ground spellcaster type of concept. And it seems like it will work very well in conjunction with either Arcane Cloak or a main skill that's linked to Archmage support. This skill offers you a way to empower your abilities whilst facing a difficult boss, providing additional damage when you need it. Its defensive properties can be really beneficial when you're when you're able to keep the boss within the sigil or against bosses that remain in one place. Like the other skills mentioned above, this ability has a long cooldown and can take advantage of second wind if you'd like to. Increasing its area and duration also works well to increase the reach and lifetime of your powered sigils. It works well alongside skills with Archmage to increase their mana cost, but other spellcast builds usually spend enough mana to fully charge up the sigil. But yeah, the first thing that came to my mind was definitely using Arcane Cloak to burn a lot of mana all at once, then unleash hell while you've got the buff of both the Sigil of Power and of the Arcane Cloak, and while the Arcane Cloak is protecting you. Then, once the Arcane Cloak runs out of its protection, then at that point, you'll have to do something else for a little while, like run around like a crazy person. Then we have Flame Wall, which was also previewed in the original trailer, so I won't go into it in any real depth. Just to say that it's available from early in the game and creates an area of burning flame. Enemies that pass through it will be inflicted with a secondary burning effect. This means you can place a flame wall between you and your enemies, then watch them melt away as they try to reach you. Projectiles fired through the wall will have fire damage added to the projectile. These flaming projectiles will also apply the wall's secondary burning effect, enemies they hit. The skill can be deployed to boost the damage of any projectile skill without any additional supports, or it can be supported with burning damage to specialize in its damage over time property. You can spread the burning damage yourself with any projectile skill, use projectile firing minions, or use minions with better AI, party members. You can have up to 3 flame walls active at once, so you can create multiple fire fields in a row with spell cascade support, or a wide defensive barrier with awakened spell cascade support. And then there's a video which I'll provide a link to below. I won't watch it with you now. But this is looking like a bunch of really interesting ideas. So Void Sphere, as I say, competes in my mind with Decoy Totem. Weaker against bosses, stronger against trash. And depending upon what content you're running, it may be something you want to consider. Definitely, I would consider this if you are running content where monsters have dangerous on-death effects. So this is the Delve Mines, this is maps like Terrace, then this becomes a lot better. Frost Shield is one that I just really need to experiment with this in practice. It's hard to give a definite opinion on how this is going to be. I think it looks cool, but we'll have to test it out. It may feel clunky when you actually get to use it, or it may be something that is just the best way to play a caster in the future, is just to stand your ground and to use Frost Shield to stay alive. Sigil of Power and Frost Shield are very similar in design space to each other, and again, it's that stand your ground concept as a caster. Flame Wall is entirely different, and there's just going to be so many ways to play around with this, especially with the experimented base types and the Solarine Bow. And of course, there is the Solarine Bow if you missed the original preview. So it is just a bow that has an enormous chunk of extra fire damage as it's implicit. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. There'll be more to follow as we keep going through. So there's one very interesting chase unique, at least I believe it will be a chase unique. It could be more common than I'm expecting. There's a divination card that is for a narrow SSF niche of people who don't progress all that far through endgame, but want a bit of acceleration of their unveiling of items. And then there's the big piece of news for the day, was the area control spells. Gonna leave it there. I hope you have a good one.